Hare Krishna, everybody. Please accept my obeisances, all devotees. We'll start with Jai Radha Madhava, and then we'll get into the Bhagavatam. Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunda Bihari, Kunda Bihari, Gopi Janavalabha, Girivaradhari, Gopi Janavalabha, Girivaradhari, Yasodhanandana Vraja Janaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari. Om Agyanatimanandasya Gyananjana Chalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadhamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Lita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakopatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'd like to take a moment first to ask the blessings of all the Vaishnavas here, especially His Grace Adi Purush Prabhu, Vasudev Prabhu, very senior members of our assembly. So being someone who's quite junior in comparison, I humbly ask your blessings. Thank you. So I just want to start by reading something inspiring from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita very briefly that I came across recently. Most of the Bowery's 7,000 or 8,000 homeless men slept in lodging houses that required them to vacate their rooms during the day. Having nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, they would loiter on the street, standing silently on the sidewalks, leaning against a wall, or shuffling slowly along, alone or in groups. In cold weather, they would wear 2 coats and several suits of clothes at once, and would sometimes warm themselves around a fire they would keep going in the city garbage can. At night, those without lodging slept on sidewalks, doorsteps, and street corners, crawled into discarded boxes, or sprawled side by side next to the bars. Thefts were commonplace. A man's pockets might be searched 10 or 20 times while he slept. The rates of hospitalization and death in the Bowery were 5 times higher than the national average, and many of the homeless men bore the marks of recent injuries or violence. So this is the setting Prabhupada came into when he first came to New York. Prabhupada's loft 94 Bowery was 6 blocks south of Houston Street. At Houston and Bowery, derelicts converged in the heavy crosstown traffic. When cars stopped for the light, bums would come up and wash the windshields and ask for money. South of Houston, the first blocks held mostly restaurants, supply stores, lamp stores, taverns, and luncheonettes. The buildings were of 3 and 4 stories, old, narrow, crowded tenements, their faces covered with heavy fire escapes. Traffic on the Bowery ran uptown and downtown. Cars parked on both sides of the street, and the constant traffic passed tightly. During the business day, working people passed briskly amongst the slow-moving derelicts. Many of the store windows were covered with protective iron gates, but behind the gates, the store owners lit their varied varieties of lamps to attract prospective households, wholesale and retail customers. Harvey Cohen had used the loft as an art studio, and racks for paintings still lined the walls. The kitchen and shower were partitioned off in the northwest corner, and a room divider stood about 15 feet from the Bowery side windows. This divider did not run from wall to wall, but was open at both ends, and it was several feet short of the ceiling. It was behind this partition that Prabhupada had his personal living area. A bed and a few chairs stood near the window, and Prabhupada's typewriter sat on his metal trunk next to the small table that held his stacks of Bhagavatam manuscripts. His dhotis hung drying on the clothesline. So I just think it's special to note Prabhupada's mood and mission when he first came here. Most of the swamis that came were uptown swamis, they called them, meaning they weren't so much into the nitty-gritty of New York and trying to attract the, let's say, less qualified, so to speak. But Prabhupada didn't care. He wanted to be in the mood of Lord Nityananda, which of course he was, which means attracting everybody, especially those who are in the worst state, materially and spiritually. So now we'll get into the Bhagavatam, 10.139. Here we go. Dehe panchat tvamapane Dehi karma nugovashaha Dehantaram anuprapya Praktanam tyajate vapu. Someone like to chant? Dehe panchatvamapane Dehi karmanugo vashaha Dehantaram anuprapya Praktanam tyajate vapuhu. Dehe, when the body, panchatramapane, turns into 5 elements. Dehi, the proprietor of the body, the living being. Karma anugaha, following the reactions of his own fruitive activities. Avashaha, spontaneously, automatically. Deha antaram, another body made of material elements. Anuprapya, receiving as a result. Praktanam, the former. Tyajate, gives up. Vapu, body. When the present body turns to dust and is again reduced to 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the proprietor of the body, the living being, automatically receives another body of material elements according to his fruitive activities. When the next body is obtained, he gives up the present body. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, which presents the beginning of spiritual understanding. Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir tirastatra namuhyati. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. 213. A person or an animal is not the material body. Rather, the material body is the covering of the living being. Bhagavad Gita compares the body to a dress and elaborately explains how one changes dresses one after another. The same Vedic knowledge is confirmed here. The living being, the soul, is constantly changing bodies one after another. Even in the present life, the body changes from childhood to boyhood, from boyhood to youth, and from youth to old age. Similarly, when the body is too old to continue, the living being gives up this body and, by the laws of nature, automatically gets another body according to his fruit of activities, desires, and ambitions. The laws of nature control this sequence, and therefore, as long as the living entity is under the control of the external material energy, the process of bodily change takes place automatically, according to one's fruit of activities. Vasudeva therefore wanted to impress upon Kamsa that if he committed this sinful act of killing a woman, in his next life he would certainly get a material body still more conditioned to the sufferings of material existence. Thus Vasudeva advised Kamsa not to commit sinful activities. One who commits sinful activities because of ignorance, tamagun, obtains a lower body. Karanam guna sangosya sadasadyoni janmasu. There are hundreds and thousands of different species of life. Why are there higher and lower bodies? One receives these bodies according to the contaminations of material nature. If in this life one is contaminated by the mode of ignorance and sinful activities, dushkriti, in the next life, by the laws of nature, one will certainly get a body full of suffering. The laws of nature are not subservient to the whimsical desires of the conditioned soul. Our endeavor, therefore, should be to associate always with sattva gun and not indulge in rajagun or tamagun. Rajastamo bhavaha. Lusty desires and greed keep the living entity perpetually in ignorance and prevent him from being elevated to the platform of sattva gun or shuddha sattva gun. One is advised to be situated in shuddha sattva gun devotional service, for thus one is immune to the reactions of the three modes of material nature. Make sure we're all plugged in here. Yes, so one of the things that struck me most about the verse in the purport was this idea of dust, that the body is eventually going to turn to dust, right? And somehow still we're placing so much emphasis on the body. It's like our main thing. I mean, not us as much, let's say, or not you guys, me a lot. But in general, you know, in the karmic world, the main focus is always on the body. But the fact is that you can't actually get that much pleasure out of it. In fact, for the most part, it's more of a source of suffering than pleasure, which Raul, I'm sure, could tell us all about, being a paramedic. Yes. There's only a very few amount of ways that the body can actually attain some kind of pleasure or satisfaction, but there's a seemingly unlimited amount of ways in which it can suffer. But the problem is that we want to have fun, right? Maybe you guys know the song, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Well, we're female by nature. Jivas just want to have fun. That's how it goes. So the question then is where do we have fun? Where do we actually get that pleasure from? And in this light, one of Prabhupada's favorite verses to quote comes up, which is Lord Rishabdev speaking to his sons. He says, Nayam deho deha bhajamni loke kastankaman arhita vidbhujamne tapo divyam putrika yena satvam shudyad yasmat brahmasakyam tamantam. Which means that of all the living entities who accept bodies in this material world, one who's been awarded the human form of life should not simply work hard day and night for sense gratification, because that kind of enjoyment is available even to the dogs and hogs that eat stool, right? They're enjoying, that's happiness for them, eating stool, because it's giving them some sensory sensation. And so in that sense, it's non-different from us when we try and enjoy material nature with our senses. It's the same exact thing. It's just we have this preference, they have that preference. I like spicy food, someone else doesn't like spicy food. But Prabhupada said, wet stool or dry stool? It's the same thing, ultimately. So then what is the solution then, right? This can't give us actual happiness. All it does is give us some temporary sensation, right? Which ultimately leads to dissatisfaction, And even while we're experiencing it, lends itself to a kind of dread, because we know it's so temporary that very soon it's going to end. And in the meantime, while I'm trying to enjoy it, this actually isn't as great as I thought it would be. But here I am nonetheless, trying my best to squeeze some enjoyment. So what is the real form of happiness? Where do we get actual happiness from? Rishabdev says, Tapo divyam putraka yena satvam shuddhyadhyasman brahma saukyam tvanantam. Tapo divyam, this divine austerity, not to be confused with, as he said, working hard, sacrificing one's material, immediate gratification for long-term material gratification. But no, tapo divyam, meaning sacrificing immediate pleasures for spiritual realization, for spiritual pleasures. So this is available to us so many ways, right? It's not even that difficult actually to perform tapo divyam, simply following the four negative principles, hearing and chanting on a regular basis, telling other people about Krishna. It's not intense austerity in that we don't have to sit underneath water for thousands of years like people used to do. We go to the caves and not eat anything, or like Dhruva Maharaj, did standing on one leg for an extended period of time. That's not necessary for us anymore. All we have to do is hear and chant, follow the four negative principles, not commit offenses, the basic process that Srila Prabhupada laid out for us. And then what is the result? Brahma Saukyam Tvanantam, which means that unlimited spiritual happiness that doesn't end. It's actually a constant thing. It stands in such stark contrast to material happiness. That material happiness, it's like this pyramid, it's just like this slow buildup. All of a sudden we peak out somewhere and we get some kind of sensation, whether it's eating or mating or sleeping, whatever it might be. And then there's a fast decline. And not only do we not feel pleasure or happiness or satisfaction anymore, we actually feel bad. We actually feel worse off than we did before. So this is Maya. This is what Maya means, that which is not. We're thinking, this will give me happiness, this will give me pleasure. In reality, it just makes us suffer more. So Prabhupada would say drugs, people taking LSD, they're trying to get rid of one suffering with another kind of suffering. In this way, they're just perpetuating their misery, not only in the short term, like we see here, just, in the actual experience, in the long term, like the verse is saying that endless bodies, we're accepting endless bodies simply for this, simply for this fleeting sensation that's actually suffering from beginning to the end. But somehow or other, we're convincing ourselves over and over again, no, this is what I want. This is happiness. This is what will make me happy. But even from a material perspective, there is some semblance of an idea that no, actually sacrifice, actually foregoing immediate gratification is what will make me happy more in the long term. Right? That's the whole idea about going to college, right? Instead of just after you get out of high school, just going to party and have a great time, you sacrifice another 4 or 8 or whatever it might be years of your life to learn more, to get a good education, so that in the long term you can prosper. So in the long term you can, so to speak, enjoy to some extent. That's why hard work is lauded. At least it was, for a long time. But now as Kali Yuga is setting in, it's more just about enjoying. But the idea always was that by working hard and sacrificing in the immediate term, in the long term, you'll be able to enjoy more. But even that, of course, is a fake out, right? Because even for those people, they get what they wanted, right? They accomplish whatever their goals were that they were sacrificing in the immediate term for, but then they're still not satisfied. And that's why we see so many people suffering from depression, anxiety these days, especially in New York City. People can't sleep. They literally can't sleep, right? They have to take some kind of medication just so they can fall asleep, because they're unable to reconcile the fact that they sacrificed their entire life for something that actually doesn't make them happy still, right? And so what do? They have to drink a ton, or at least, they have to have some kind of form of forgetfulness to make them somewhat numb to the fact that they've wasted their lives, and they're continuing to waste their life, and they don't know what will actually make them happy. And of course, divorce is at an all-time high and increasing, because they're thinking, oh, I just have to adjust this now. if I could just change this, change that, then I'll be happy. It's the same thing, just suffering for another kind of suffering. It always leads to the same end, which is dissatisfaction and ultimately birth and death. So we're so lucky to have Srila Prabhupada, who came into the Bowery of all places. He came to the Lower East Side of the Bowery, like we read earlier, it was filled with bums and people who had no sense of anything. They were like we were describing, the people who leave high school and just want to enjoy. They had no sense of even sacrifice for the long term for material gratification. They were simply enjoying, and free love, just unlimited mating and all kinds of gratification. But no, he came to them. Nityananda Triyodashi is coming up. This is the mood of Lord Nityananda. I think one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, after he left, said that Prabhupada was a Shaktabesh avatar, someone who's empowered specifically by Lord Nityananda to preach as if he was preaching. And this is the reason why, because even the people who had absolutely no conception of even like how to live a respectable material life, he came to give them the highest thing, to instruct them to how to actually attain real happiness. And of course, it's a easy thing to do, right? I could go and find somebody on the street and start telling them about chanting Hare Krishna and stuff. But Prabhupada had the potency by which he could actually convert people into brahmanas, where they're actually situated in the mode of goodness. It's inconceivable, actually. That's why we're so indebted to Srila Prabhupada, and why he's always going to remain the founder Acharya of ISKCON, always in that position of the preeminent guru for everyone for all time. Because by his mercy, by his potency, by his authenticity and sincerity, he was able to convert thousands of people. I mean, just thinking about what we were reading earlier in his original situation, where he was living in a communal area with an artist who was taking LSD all the time, and all he had was a curtain separating his little space from the guy's space, to just a few years later being able to travel around the world. And there being centers all around the world where hundreds of people, if not thousands, are chanting Hare Krishna, following the Four Noble Principles. It's inconceivable. It's really crazy. It's unprecedented. I mean, it's really, and it's hard to even imagine now, because we're kind of in that stage now where, there's the peak, and then after the Acharya leaves, and there's a little bit of, kind of a pullback. But as we progress and as we think about it, and as time goes on, people will look back at Prabhupada and understand that he was perhaps the most incredible personality to ever appear in not only on the earth as we know it, but even in a day of Brahma, because we know Lord Chaitanya only comes so often. So for him to do what he did, to give what he did, which is only available very seldomly, in the way that he did, Prabhupada is incomparable. So we're incredibly indebted to him. So yes, I mean, to get back to a more practical application, I think, in terms of really getting pleasure from Krishna consciousness and from hearing and chanting, ultimately it comes from our level of faith, because the more faith we have in the process, the more we actually have realized that this is the real deal, that this will actually give me happiness, and the more we'll be able to absorb ourselves in it. But then it creates a kind of interesting paradigm. There's this one really incredible devotee named Banabhatta Prabhu, who was a Prabhupada disciple, and he spent decades, like Adi Purush Prabhu, just on Sankirtan, just traveling and doing Sankirtan. And so I stayed with him for a short amount of time some years ago, and I could just tell by associating with him that he had completely unflinching faith, that his faith was fixed like lines in stone. There was no question of any form of doubt in him, but it wasn't, I could tell it wasn't a blind fanatical faith. Of course, it couldn't be for someone to be that serious for that long in Krishna consciousness. It had to be well-founded. And so I asked him, how did you get such strong faith? And he essentially boiled it down to full faith comes from full absorption. And when we're actually situated in Krishna consciousness, when we're really plugged in to the hearing and chanting process, then naturally we gain the experiences necessary that we can finally feel that, yes, this is the real thing. With the right attitude, with being fully absorbed, then these experiences can come. And that's not a fanatical or ethereal idea, right? We understand Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says this is the supreme truth. This is the supreme religion because it gives pratyaksha. It gives direct experiences of the self through realization. And so the question is, and how to gain those experiences. And so Bhanabhata is explaining it's through full absorption. And of course, one has to be absorbed with the proper attitude. So in a practical sense, we could ask ourselves, what are we doing with our free time? Are we, we have a moment, are we sitting down and getting into Facebook, or are we getting into Krishna book, right? Are we following someone on Instagram, or are we following Prabhupada? These are the choices we can make. And it's difficult. It's difficult because we're so conditioned to a certain mindset or a conviction of what will actually give us happiness and will give us pleasure. And we're so conditioned to think it's the instant gratification, it's the Instagram, the instant grat that will actually give us some semblance of joy. But in reality, it's not. And we feel that, right? I mean, it's so funny that we keep telling ourselves that, we keep falling into, at least I do, keep falling into those patterns of enjoyment or trying to enjoy, even though at the end of whatever it is, after scrolling or whatever it might be, we always feel like empirically bad. We don't feel good, after that. But after, absorbing ourselves in Krishna consciousness in some way, whether it's reading Krishna book or there's so many audiobooks available now, following Prabhupada, then yeah. Prabhupada Lilamrita? Yeah. I have a hard time putting it down oftentimes. It's so exciting, especially in the beginning, watching Prabhupada make the moves that would ultimately lead to what we see today. But yeah, there's so many ways in which we can engage ourselves in Krishna consciousness by which we actually feel blissful afterwards. So we can ask ourselves to what extent we're doing that, and we can measure that up to our level of satisfaction in Krishna consciousness. And it's then easy to see why we might be feeling a certain way or not feeling a certain way. So yes, there's some practical things. Of course, the attitude is also most important. Prabhupada said, attitude determines altitude. There's tons of verses in the Bhagavatam and in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that go into this importance of attitude. One of the hallmarks is Shinvatam, perhaps more of the subtle ones though, Shinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanam Vedantak Stoha Bhadrani Vijunoti Suhritsatam. But Sri Krishna, who is the Paramatma within everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of one who has developed the urge to hear his messages. But that qualifier, I think, is so important, the benefactor of the truthful devotee, which means someone who's authentic, who's honest with themselves, and who makes it a point to become aware of the things inside their heart that are holding them back from actually loving Krishna, from actually loving the devotees, and makes every endeavor to fix those by that sincerity, because ultimately we're little, we're very tiny Jivas. We can only do so much, especially even in terms of our own purification. But by that attitude and by that endeavor, then Krishna can step in. Lord Chaitanya steps in and he cleanses the desires from material enjoyment from our heart. We just have to make that endeavor, that sincere endeavor, that honest endeavor. And then that mood and that sincerity is what attracts Krishna's grace, Lord Chaitanya's grace. And do you have something to say, Haripush?
Yeah. I'm not sure how this broadcast.
Just
Volume.
turn your volume down. What's so surprising to me, shocking, here's Kamsa. He's got Devaki's hair in one hand and sword in the other. And Vasudeva is giving Bhagavad Gita class, right? Krishna speaks it on the battlefield, right before a battle. And here it is. Now, the thing is, you're not this body. And if you do this, you might lose your status as a respectable person. And, the body died in the middle. It's like, so like the application of that is astounding as it may seem. We found ourselves so many times speaking these same basic principles that we've heard so many times that we forget how it lands on somebody who hasn't heard it in a while or hasn't heard it at all. And that it's appropriate for us also to speak these basic things. Did you ever consider, just by somehow or other breaking that into whatever conversation and situation we're in? Because, you're doing book distribution. Here you are at the marketplace, at the park, in some unusual, casual situation where people didn't expect to get a transcendental speech. And so just out of confidence and following the footsteps of Srila, just actually to bring those things up is appropriate for us to do that. And I forget, but somehow the Krishna, we find ourselves speaking to our landlord or to the guy taking care of the trash in front of the building, or, and it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's so in our line also. I forget the name of the Brahmana, but there was one Brahmana when Lord Chaitanya was on his tour around southern India, I believe. And he was so in love, so enamored by Lord Chaitanya, and he was feeling such bliss in his association. And he finally said to Lord Chaitanya, "How will I remember you? How will I stay in this state while you're gone?" And then Lord Chaitanya very plainly tells him, it's nothing ethereal, nothing lofty. Just tell everyone you meet about Krishna.
Tell everyone you meet. That's hard.
But we can try our best. It is difficult. I would say not easy all the time. But if we make that sincere endeavor when the moments arise, and we flip the switch in the back of our brains to actually just jump into the water, the cold water a little bit, and just bring something up. Keep a book on us, and just like, hey, I'm giving these out. They're on meditation, and then their life is changed forever. It's amazing. Like we're seeing here, so many bodies are changing, millions and millions. It's inconceivable, actually, the millions of lifetimes. There's 4,300,000 in years in a day of Brahma. No, in a Divya Yuga. In a Divya Yuga, 4,300,000 years. There's 1,000 Divya Yugas in one day of Brahma. Brahma is 50 years old. So, I mean, we've passed an inconceivable amount of bodies. And then one day, if some devotee in the grocery store bumps into someone and they're forced to have a conversation in some way about the bread that they're in front of, and then he decides, let me give this guy a book. Then all of a sudden, their entire destiny is changed forever. Instead of having to reincarnate millions and millions of times more, perpetually, fish, locusts, inconceivable bodies, a lobster who gets boiled alive. Millions are being boiled alive every day. Instead of having to experience that over and over again, like they already have been, now they found an out. Now their path now is assured. Prabhupada said, someone asked one time, this may be somewhat controversial, but someone asked Prabhupada, well, we understand that nobody can go back to Godhead without being initiated. So what to speak of all these people who are getting your books and maybe sincere, but and Prabhupada said, if they receive and read one of my books, then they're initiated by that act, simply by coming in contact with my books. So Yes, it's such a ecstatic, for me, it's the most ecstatic form of tapodiv yam, of divine austerity, is just giving someone a book. Because you know that now their whole destiny has shifted, and it's only a matter of time now before they actually attain love of God and get out of the material universe, which they've been suffering in, which you've all been suffering in for millions and millions of lifetimes. So
We hear that in
we hear that instruction from Srila Prabhupada again and again. Tell everyone you meet. And I still hesitate, a little shy, just to say Hare Krishna, just to say Hare Krishna to someone. We were going through a toll booth in Philadelphia, and I heard that tell everyone you meet. So he said, I said, well, one other thing. He said, what? I said, we want you to chant Hare Krishna and be happy, and then I drove out, and then he jumped out of the toll booth. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I do, Hare Krishna. I was like, oh, you never know how they're going to respond. We go to the deli and the guy says Hare Krishna every time I see him. We go to the parking lot, they say Hare Krishna. And I'm thinking like, well, yeah, we should at least give them the holy name,
yeah, no, I mean, this is it. This is Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. That's what it means. You engage people in chanting Hare Krishna in some way, whether it's a book or just telling them about Krishna or saying Hare Krishna to them. You have them come in contact with the holy name. And then that's where the bliss comes in, where people are some people, even after so many years, even maybe lifetimes of practicing Krishna consciousness, maybe they might still be wondering, where is the bliss for me? Where is this ecstasy that I've been told about? And the fact is that even for someone who is engaged in Sankirtan, there will be happiness and distress. Matra sparshas chikunteya, that's how it goes. But it's undoubted, it's a fact that if you do engage in Sankirtan, you are plugged into Lord Chaitanya's movement and you will experience that bliss. Until we reach a certain level, then it may not be all the time unceasing and unending bliss, but you will come in contact with the internal potency of the Lord.
please,
And you please Krishna.
Krishna.
Yes. Yeah. It's a natural. Yes. Oh, yes. And I guess we'll end here now for questions. Anyone has questions? We have Andrea as a hand. Please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Anupama Prabhu. Thank you so much for always a very relatable class. Angelica wrote a really sweet realization in the chat about that. I don't know if you wanted to read it aloud. I'll read it aloud for you because I think you would be a little embarrassed, but it's very sweet. She said, I was watching this class in a living room and helping my mom with little things. Then she glanced at the computer and said, what a young, very handsome man. Anupama Prabhu, my mom recognized how your sincerity and connection to Krishna makes you attractive. What a beautiful reminder. So I thought that was really sweet. And it kind of speaks to what I wanted to share about how sometimes you don't even have to say anything to someone, but if you, as you said, if you're connected to the Sankirtan, either by sincere chanting or you're trying to do your sadhana sincerely and connect to Krishna, sometimes people just get a sense, are attracted just by how you are. You don't even have to say anything. So sometimes that would happen to me at work when I used to work full time. That people would be like, why are you happy all the time? And then I was like, well, there's time, place, and circumstance. So there's just so much you can say at work. And I would say, well, I do a lot of chanting and da-da-da. And they're like, oh, can you tell me more about it? And then I'd be like, well, let me give you my personal email if you want. We could talk about it there, or we could talk outside of work, because again, you have to keep it in the time, place, and circumstance. But I've heard that from other devotees where if they are in a circumstance where they can't just, they're not able to like preach, that it just by their way of being, just by the way that they treat other people, if they're sincere, if they're respectful, if they actually listen to others and are empathic in that way, like they're with the people, they're present with that. I loved your Jiva soul thing, like Jivas just want to have fun. if they're really present in that joyful way with other Jivas so that they feel heard, then they're having that Krishna conscious moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes. all glories to Prabhupada. Of course, he was the emblem of that. People just saw him, heard him say one word, heard him say Hare Krishna, and then that was it for them. They surrendered. So yes, trying to follow in his footsteps.
We hear
Prabhupada say, tell everyone you meet. And we also hear Prabhupada say, give them prasad. You know, we stop at the stoplight and somebody comes up begging. We have prasad. We always have a little prasad there. Radhanath Swami won't get in the car unless they have something to give whenever somebody comes up begging. You know, when here in the East Village, so many times you see somebody, I stop where I'm going, go into the nearest store, buy a little muffin or something, offer it to Krishna, come out and say, this is for you, please accept this, you know. And it breaks the ice, you know. One time we were on the subway and this lady came on, she was screaming and yelling in Spanish. And she said, and I hate white men. And I was the only male body with a Caucasian body, you know, and I was like, okay. And then she came over and stood right in front of me. I said, well, I'm kind of like light brown, not really white, you know. I was like comparing it to my t-shirt. And then she pulled out this big knife, like a serrated kitchen knife, like about 6 or 7 inches long. And she was standing right over me. And I was like, oh. And I was ready. I was thinking I'll slide back in the seat and kick her with both feet or something, because this is like, and then she puts the knife on her own neck like this and starts to draw it across her neck. And it was like a little herringbone and the blood was coming out. I said, 1 second, you know, what do? You know, fortunately, I had a little prasad in my pocket. I had little peanuts and raisins from the Didi. I said, this is for you. And she was like, oh, okay. So she took the prasadam, you know, and then the train stopped and everybody off the train. It was like, apparently she did something at the previous station and hundreds of people got off the train except her. And then when she got off, then everybody back on the train, back. So everybody got back on. And then the police came and they grabbed her. And when the train was pulling out, so she was taking the prasadam. So like, you know, I mean, it's always appropriate. It seems like some other thing you should do besides give them prasad or tell them, please chant Hare Krishna. But it's what we're called to do. And we have to remember that. Just like in this occasion with the big sword, he's ready to cut his wife's head off, you know, and he starts to preach. It's like, wow. The pen is mightier than the sword, you know. He could have tried to like confront Kamsa physically, but instead he spoke.
Should have given them prasadam.
Should have given. Wait, we have some prasadam for you.
Anupama. Yes. So on the site,
It's muted. We can't hear anything?
All glories to Prabhupada.
How wonderful is Krishna.
How wonderful is Krishna. And how wonderful is Madhvacharya. It's also his appearance day today. So we want to quickly mention him. And we're called the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya because of him. He had a huge impact on our whole lineage. It's already pretty much 8 o'clock, but I'll just read one quote from him that especially embodies his teachings and how we should try and follow him. He says, there are many lands, fields, mountains, and oceans throughout the creation, and everywhere the Supreme Personality of Godhead is worshipped by the chanting of his different names. So yes, holy names are meant to be our life and soul, and by chanting them sincerely and spreading them around, then success is guaranteed. So thank you everybody for your kind attendance, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
bye everyone. Have a wonderful day. Haribol.